Lesson 15.1, Task 1. Analyze angles of rotation and identify coterminal angles. In trigonometry, an angle of rotation, theta, and we're going to use this symbol for angles, so you're going to see this a lot, is an angle formed by the starting and ending positions of a ray that rotates about its endpoints. In standard position, you're going to hear this a lot as well. In standard position, the endpoint of the ray is at the origin of a coordinate plane, and the initial side, very important to know, the initial side of the angle lies along the positive x-axis. A curved arrow is used to indicate the direction of rotation from the starting position to the ending position of the ray. The ending position of the ray is called the terminal side of the angle. All right, so as you can see, here's an image. The initial side here is always on the positive x-axis. All right, and the terminal side is where it's rotated to. So you can see they've used this directional arrow to show you that the angle has rotated and it goes to that part. So you can remember, like if it goes up to the y-axis, that's going to be 90 degrees. If it goes over to the other x-axis, that's 180. If it goes all the way down here to the y-axis, that would be 270. And if you go all the way around back to the initial side, that's 360 degrees. All right, so we're going to be talking about angles of rotation. All right, so the angle of rotation can be counterclockwise, positive angle measures, or clockwise, negative measure angles. All right, so let's look at this again. All right, so the reason, if it goes counterclockwise, so the first quadrant, if you remember in other math classes, this would be quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. So it starts quadrant 1 in your positive axis. So this is my positive x, this is my positive y, and that's why this is quadrant 1. So you go quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you rotate counterclockwise, but with the quadrants, it's a positive angle. If you rotate the opposite direction, it would be considered a negative angle. So make sure you have that in your notes, as that will be important as we move through and talk about angle rotation. All right, it says when the terminal side of two angles are different measure, or of two angles, let me start over. When the terminal side of two angles of different measures coincide, they are called coterminal angles. The angles you encountered in geometry have measures between 0 and 180. Angles of rotation, however, can have measures greater than 180 or less than 0. Now they can still be between 0 and 180, but they also can be larger or smaller. So just remember that angles now are not going to be just strictly between 0 and 180. All right, so it says the angles with measures of 214 degrees and negative 146 are shown. So again, we have, this is called the initial side, and this is the terminal side. And you can see the line in blue rotates counterclockwise, so it's a positive 214 degrees. This one's going to rotate clockwise, which is backwards from your quadrants, so it's negative 146. These two angles both fall on the same terminal line, so these two angles are called coterminal angles. That's important to know. That's one of the definitions you'll need to know. So coterminal angles are basically 360 degrees apart, because if you add 360 or subtract 360, you're going to get back to that same terminal side. So the absolute value of these two added together would be 360 degrees. All right, so it says identify the initial side and the terminal side. So the initial side is where you start. That's the positive x-axis always. And the terminal side is the side where you rotate to. All right, so it says, how are the angles related? How are they different? The angles share the same terminal side and initial side, so they are coterminal angles, okay? The rotation direction blank is one positive. The rotation is different. One is positive, which is counterclockwise. Remember, if it goes in the positive angle, it's going to be counterclockwise. And the other is negative, which goes clockwise. And that's just talking about the angle of rotation, which direction it rotates in. All right, are there any other angles that would be coterminal with the angles shown? Yes, the angles share the terminal side and coterminal side. Yes, so any angle that shares that would be considered a coterminal angle. So, like I said, if you add or subtract 360, and you can add 360 more than once, or you can subtract 360 more than once. So, any angles that share both the initial side and terminal side are considered coterminals. This one would not work. That one's not true, and that one's not true because they both say no. So the first answer is the correct one. Sketch a pair of coterminal angles. All right, I don't know how good I can do, but I can. Let's see. If I can draw an angle here, that's my initial side. And I can draw something representing this direction and this direction. I don't know exactly what the angle measure is, but if I go in the positive direction, this would be the positive direction, and I go in the negative direction, as long as they fall on the same terminal side and they start with the same initial side, they would be considered coterminal angles. All right, so here's one that's an example. It shows this small angle of 25 degrees, and then it shows a negative 335 degrees. So they have one positive, one negative. They start on the same initial side, and they have the same terminal side, so those are considered coterminal. Explain the relationship. All right, like I said, so it'd be like the absolute value of the two angles would equal 360 degrees. And the reason I say absolute value is because if you have a positive and a negative, if you just add those two, then it would look like subtraction. And you want to do the absolute value because you're actually looking at the two angles together would equal 360, regardless of the direction they go in. All right, so it says the angle with measure 431 degrees is shown. All right, so we have a measure right here. This little one shows that it's 71 degrees. And then we have all the way around past 360 and back to the terminal side, and it shows that that is 431 degrees. So if you have an angle that is larger than 360, you have to show that by going all the way around and then back to that angle again. Okay, so you can see that this is just an estimate of where that would be. You should know which quadrant at least it's in, and you should be able to find approximately where that would be. And you could just say how much further past 360 is 431, and that tells you that it's closer to the y-axis than it is the x. So that angle is 431 degrees. What does the curved arrow tell you about the angle? The angle has a negative rotation. It does not exist. It completes more than one full rotation, so that's what it does. This tells me that it goes around more than one full rotation, and it is in standard position, so that one would not be correct. How could you find a positive coterminal angle? How could you find a negative coterminal angle? Well, it depends on what angle you start with. If I start with 90 degrees, I could add 360, and that gives me a positive coterminal angle. If I start with 90 and I subtract 360, that would give me a negative coterminal angle. Now, if I have an angle that's larger than 360, for example, the angle 450 degrees, if I need a negative coterminal angle, I would have to subtract 360 twice in order to get a negative number. So it just depends on the angle that you start with. But most of the time, if you start with an angle that's between 0 and 360, you add 360 and subtract 360 to get a positive and a negative coterminal angle. All right, is it possible to identify other coterminal angles? Yes, again, you just see if they add or subtract 360 if you get to the same terminal side. Draw and support. I'm not much of a drawer, so if you want to draw that and see, you can do so. But that's all for task 1. If you have any questions, let me know.